بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So inshallah in today's lecture we will actually begin the discussion of the biography of Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu. So inshallah the next, I would say, maybe 2 or 3 lectures including this one will be more of history, more of a biography. So one of the things that I would like you to keep in mind is when we study history, it's important that you remember names and dates. I know people don't like that, but it's just one of those things. So what we are going to do today is we are going to look at the very early beginnings of Imam Shafi'i's life, including we will inshallah get into his actual studies, his beginning of his studies in Mecca. So I will mention some of his main teachers. And it's important that you just, you commit those names to memories and have a rough idea of their death dates. So when we talk about dates, the death dates. At the same time, inshallah, before we get into that, as I might have mentioned in the previous lecture, is we will have a little bit of some political history. And in the case of the story of Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah specifically, that's very important because it's the internal political stability of the Muslim world that gives the environment, the needed environment for Imam Shafi'i to really grow intellectually. That's very significant. So I will talk a little bit about that. That's one of the things that you're going to learn. We'll learn a little bit about Imam Shafi'i's nasab, his lineage, which is quite an important part of his personality. Talk a little bit about his mother, talk about his birth, of course, and as I said, his beginning studies. And we will talk about not just his formal studies, but we will also talk about some of other aspects of Imam Shafi'i that was very important for his intellectual makeup, namely his knowledge of the Arabic language and his study of history. So those two things are very important. As he himself said, rahimahullah, I only studied Arabic language and history to increase my understanding of fiqh. So that's also a major part of his intellectual makeup. And when you read the books of Imam Shafi'i and the later Shafi'i jurists, you will see that those type of themes are repeated. And then we will conclude, inshallah, by just the beginning discussion of his relationship with Imam Malik, rahimahullah, inshallah. And without further ado, let us begin our journey together. Imam Shafi'i was born in the year 150 of the Hijrah and died in the year 204, rahimahullah. He was born in Gaza, Palestine, and he died in Cairo, Egypt. And even though you can see from the dates that he lived a very short life in years, but mashallah, he was blessed, infinitely blessed, with a long scholarly life. And because he is one of the great figures of Islam, and because he is the eponym of this madhab, of course we have this course dedicated to understanding him, and by understanding him, inshallah, we will come to understand how to approach the fiqh and his methodology. Now, Imam Shafi'i was born and came of age in a time during great internal political stability during the Abbasid Khilafah. And he lived through 6 Khalifas, whom I want to mention their names and their dates, and then we'll talk about why that's important. So the first one was Abu Ja'far al-Mansur Abdullah ibn Muhammad, who reigned from 136 to 158. Of course, these are Hijri dates. And then Muhammad al-Mahdi ibn Abi Ja'far al-Mansur, who ruled from 158 to 169. And then Musa al-Hadi ibn Muhammad al-Mahdi, who ruled from 169 to 170. And then the famous Harun al-Rashid ibn Muhammad al-Mahdi, who ruled from 170 to 193. Then Muhammad al-Amin ibn Harun al-Rashid, who ruled from 193 to 198. And then Abdullah al-Ma'mun ibn Harun al-Rashid, who ruled from 198 to 218. So obviously he outlived Imam Shafi'i himself. Now, as you know, or hopefully you will know from early Islamic history, Unfortunately, after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ to Ar-Rafiq al-A'la, there was a great deal of internal political instability. The fitna between the Sahaba, and then the rise of the Umayyads, and then there were many revolts or many oppositions to that political rule from within the family of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, Ahlul Bayt, which now we refer to them as Shia, but when I say the word Shia now, obviously people's minds go somewhere else, so it's kind of hard to use the terms, but those early Shia, the people that even we would support, and Imam Abu Hanifa himself supported, radiallahu anhu, etc., trying to oppose the unjust rule, etc. But there was a lot of that friction in the beginning, and there is this undercurrent of opposition to the rule. As a matter of fact, the last really major opposition to that was by Muhammad ibn Abdullah, who's known as An-Nafs al-Zakiyya, who was killed, unfortunately, in the year 145. So that happened, Muhammad Nafs al-Zakiyya, when he was slaughtered from Al Bayt, alayhi salam, and then the people of the family of the Prophet fled to the Al-Maghrib, and then there's an opposing khilafah there. I mean, this is not a course in history, but just so you have a sketch of what's going on. That happened in the year 145, and we said that Imam al-Shafi'i was born in 150. So Imam al-Shafi'i comes right at the end of a lot of that political instability. Now, Imam al-Shafi'i, as we will come to learn, is a descendant of the family of the Prophet, the wider definition of the family of the Prophet, and that will actually get him in trouble, as he is going to be falsely accused of being a subversive. We'll find out that later, not in this lecture, but in the following lectures. So when we talk about that, you need to understand, well, why is that even an issue? So now you know that there was these forces at play. So the upshot is that he grew up, was born into an age of great political stability internally and great expansion of the Muslim body politic inside, internal expansion. When he came of age, Baghdad was the capital of Islam. It was the capital of the Khilafah. And there was internal stability, there was the funding of great institutions internally, and there was also external expansion of the empire of the Khilafah. So he came of age into that, and it's very, as I said, I can't emphasize that enough. It's very important to realize that, because stability is very important for a scholarly life. And if you don't have the space and the peace of mind to be able to sit and to read and to write and to teach and to advance things, then if you're always having to put out fires, then you're not going to be able to produce. There were scholars in the past who were like that, and even up until the modern age, there were many ulama who lived like that and who were unjustly incarcerated and killed and assassinated unjustly. Our pages, unfortunately, of history are filled with those type of stories. But alhamdulillah, Allah Ta'ala spared Imam al-Shafi'i, and you will really come to see that he was really this is not to say that the others weren't, but he was really a pure scholar. I mean, he was completely 110% dedicated to his scholarly pursuit, to his project of developing for us a way, a framework by which and through which we can understand the Quran and Sunnah. And that was largely facilitated, of course, first and foremost by the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but on the dunya plane through this great political stability and his ability to travel all of these places, to go to Yemen, to come from Gaza back to Medina, Mecca to Medina, then to Yemen, then to Baghdad several times, and then to Egypt. I mean, just that type of movement that type of movement was facilitated by that political stability. As far as the scholarly life at this time, this was a time of great state patronage to the scholarly life. And again, this is one of the very, very important features of Islamic history, is that there were many, many times in which the powers that be, the people that hold the purse strings, were very generous in endowing institutions, building libraries, supporting their ulama, and that is one of the things that allows the scholarly life to thrive. So Imam al-Shafi'i also benefited from that secondarily. I mean, he'd never really received any patronage from that point of view. He was really an independent scholar. Some of the Hanafi scholars by distinction were sort of qada and served as judges and things like that. That will not happen into the Shafi'i madhab until later. When we talk about the history of the madhab later, we will see that there were people that became ministers and judges. But Imam Shafi'i himself, rahimahullah, and his students were just independent private scholars. But they benefited secondarily from the fact that there was this great access to the ulama. There were large libraries in Baghdad, and there was a great movement to codify and to write a lot of the ulum down. A lot of the historians will refer to this as Asr Tadween, the age in which the sciences were codified and written down. So this is the time period in which books of fiqh were written, hadith, or some of the earlier collections of hadith, that is not the canon, Arabic language books, so on and so forth. And there was this great movement that was also facilitated by a technological advancement, which was there was a creation of a paper factory in Baghdad. So now paper was readily available. So now you have books and you have paper and you have ink, and there's this patronage. So this was like the cutting edge. Baghdad was the cutting edge of all of this. At one point, Imam Shafi'i asked a friend, he's like, have you ever been to Baghdad? And then he said, no. He said, well, you haven't seen the world. So in Imam Shafi'i's mind, Baghdad was the summary of the entire world at that time. This was also Baghdad and the central part of the body politic of the Abbasid Caliphate was also a melting pot of languages and religions and other thought. There was a movement of great translation of other works, of other philosophies, of other religious works. This was at the time when Muslims first encountered Western logic, for example, and some of the books of Aristotle and his students were translated into the Arabic language. So now when you study the Sharia today, as inshallah you will with us, you will study logic, al-mantiq. Well, now you know that this was introduced at this time, so that's also very significant. At the same time, this was also the rise of many sects. So there were many fanatical sects or Shia sects, Mu'tazilites, Khawarij, all of those things, all of those seeds in different sizes, shapes, and form and strengths all existed at this time. So Baghdad specifically, but the Muslim world at this time was a huge melting pot for all of these things. In addition to all of this, this was the rise of ikhtilaf. This was a time in which there were great debates. And this is what really sharpens Imam Shafi'i's mind. These debates are probably the most important intellectual influence on him, is that he starts to debate and argue in a constructive way, that is a positive way, the origins of the proof texts and how to deduce rulings from them, as we will come to see inshallah in the next clips. So I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we talk about ikhtilaf and all of the intellectual things, let's come back to Imam Shafi'i and his biography. Imam Shafi'i is blessed in that he has 4 companions, 4 Sahaba in his lineage. And let's just read his full name so that we have that. He is Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Idris ibn al-Abbas ibn Uthman ibn Shafi' ibn al-Sa'ib ibn Ubaid ibn Abd Yazid ibn Hashim ibn al-Muttalib ibn Abd al-Manaf al-Matlabi al-Qurashi rahimahullah. So his great-grandfather Shafi' ibn al-Sa'ib was a companion, and then he also has 3 others in his lineage: al-Sa'ib ibn Ubaid, Ubaid ibn Abd Yazid, and Abd Yazid ibn Hashim. All 4 of those in his direct lineage were from the companions of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So that's, like tremendous, obviously, lineage to have, that in that early, he was born in 150, so to have in that early period that type of lineage. So one of the things about Imam Shafi'i's lineage is that he is a Qurashi. He comes from the people of Quraysh. And the Prophet ﷺ had foretold that there will be somebody from Quraysh that will fill the earth with knowledge. And many people, Shafi'is and non-Shafi'is alike, will say and claim that this was a foretelling of Imam Shafi'i himself, rahimahullah. And he was also a Matlabi. Al-Matlabi is important because this is one of our definitions of the al of the Prophet ﷺ, the family. When we talk about the family of the Prophet ﷺ, from the point of view of the sharaf, the honor of the direct lineal descendants of the Prophet ﷺ, of course we are talking about the children of Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam and Imam Ali alayhi salam, the descendants of those are al al-Bayt. But from the point of view of the wider al, those that, for example, who in the traditional fiqh, when we study furu'ah together, the traditional fiqh are not allowed to take from the zakah, the definition is wider. So for that, we have the children of Matlab, Bani Matlab, and Hashim, because those are the families at the time of the Prophet ﷺ that supported Rasulullah ﷺ. We do not include in them Bani Shams and Bani Nufayl. So there are multiple definitions of the family of the Prophet ﷺ. So from the point of view of the wider definition of the family, who constitute the Ahlul Bayt, the wider definition, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إنما بنو هاشم وبنو المطلب شيء واحد. The families of Hashim and Muttalib are one and the same. So therefore, like Al-Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, and his descendants would be considered Ahlul Bayt from the wider definition, which is why the Muslim Ummah accepted, or the Sunnis at least accepted, the Khilafah of the Abbasids, because they are descendants from Al-Abbas alayhi salam. But from the point of view of the sharaf, of the direct nasab, of the direct lineal descendants, of course the definition is confined to Ahlul Kisa, the hadith that we find of the Kisa, the descendants of Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam and Imam Ali alayhi salam. So from the wider definition, he is a Matlabi. He is also from the tribe of Quraysh. So he has these two dual honors in his lineage, in addition to having four of his grandparents in ascending order being from the companions of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. As I said, because there was this emergence of the Shia movement in the early few centuries of Islam, Imam Shafi'i will be accused of being a subversive later because of his lineage is known. It's inescapable. It's part of his identity. Now, not much is known about Imam Shafi'i's mother, radiallahu anha, but we know from Imam Shafi'i's grandson, who wrote about him, that his mother was from the tribe of Azd. We also know that while Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah came from a noble descent and from a noble lineage, he did not come from a family of knowledge or a family of means. In other words, he didn't grow up in a household where everyone was a scholar and memorized all these texts and teaching like some of the other people or other ulama. Many times when you read the biography of a famous alim, like let's say, like when we get to the Subki family, one of the great families, Syrian, Egyptian families we talk about in the Shafi'i madhab, it seems like every nook and cranny of the house in the family was a scholar. So it would make sense that they produce scholars, and that is very typical. That he grew up for bayta ilm. He grew up in a household of knowledge. Imam Shafi'i was not like that. They grew up in a noble house, noble descent, and they grew up in a family that was dedicated to obviously Islam and everything and practicing, but they were not a family known for knowledge, nor were they wealthy. So Imam Shafi'i, he grew up very, very poor. And he said about that later in life, he said, I am so accustomed to poverty that it no longer scares me. Now that is a tremendous statement, and every time I think about that statement, it's a kind of, it goes deeper and deeper for me, because one of the great fears that we have in the human condition is the fear of poverty. I think in one recent study, people in the West, maybe it was America only, but let's just say the West in general, that there's now more people that are scared of poverty than they are of death or sickness. Can you imagine that? Because when you have and then it's taken away, it's very painful. But he really never had, so he got so accustomed to it. So this is just his simple dunya state. That's just his state. That's life for him. So it was nothing for him to fear. Again, that's one of the things that kind of inside him that allows him to give him that space to dedicate himself to the scholarly life. But his mother did encourage his learning. And his mother pushed him to learn, took him to the Kuttab so that he could learn to read and write and memorize the Quran. And many of the biographies of Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah will often comment about how his mother was the first real great influence in his life to push him towards the scholarly life. He didn't have enough money to pay the teacher. He would just sort of hang out in class. He would find old bones and write his lessons on it. And he said of himself, until I had like these two big kind of bags or tubs of bones in which my lessons were written on. But Imam Shafi'i was gifted with what we would probably call today a type of photographic memory. So he said when the teacher would give the lesson to another student in the class, by the time the teacher had finished giving the lesson, I had already memorized what the teacher had said. Imam al-Shafi'i, as a result, memorized the Quran by the age of 7. I just think of what I was like when I was 7. Imam al-Shafi'i memorized the entire Quran by the age of 7. And he had memorized the Muwatta of Imam Malik rahimahullah by the age of 10, which is very significant as we will come to see. And he had memorized tons and tons of Arabic poetry. Now, before I get to the poetry part, because that's important. About the Quran, his Quran teacher was Ismail ibn Abdullah ibn Qastantine, who was born in the year 100 and died in the year 170 of the Hijrah, radiallahu anhu, one of the great Quran teachers at the time. In this early period in Mecca, so Imam Shafi'i, we said, was born in Gaza, but shortly thereafter his mother brought him down to Mecca. And he grew up in the shade of the Kaaba studying. But in his early years, one of the things that he did is he used to go to neighboring Arab tribes, the tribe of Hudayl. And in very similar fashion with his great-great-grandfather, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when the Prophet ﷺ grew up in Bani Sa'd and kind of to learn the pure Arabic, Imam al-Shafi'i was also blessed in learning the pure Arabic. As a matter of fact, Imam al-Shafi'i memorized the entire poetry of the tribe of Hudayl. And Al-Asma'i, who was a great linguist who died in the year 215, he had heard that there was a teenager in Mecca who knew the poetry of Hudayl. So he sat with Imam al-Shafi'i so he could review the poetry of Hudayl, and Imam al-Shafi'i would correct it. Now, to put that in perspective, to give you a sense of what that means, two things is that Imam al-Shafi'i was considered a proof in the Arabic language. When you talk about language and you want to understand the usage of a word, you go back in time to look at how the word was used in the past. And because this is somewhat of a longer discussion, let me pause here so you can take a break, and we'll pick up the discussion in the next clip, inshallah. So we left off talking about how Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah had memorized the poetry of Hudayl, and how Al-Asma'i, the great linguist Al-Asma'i, who died in the year 215, had heard that there was a young man, a young teenager in Mecca who had known the poetry of Hudayl. So he was reciting the poetry of Hudayl, and Imam Shafi'i was correcting it. Now what that means, that's like the equivalent of you finding a young person in the West who has memorized all of the plays of Shakespeare, or the Canterbury Tales of Geoffrey Chaucer, some of the writing that formulates English literature. Now why that's significant is because when we talk about language, if you look at the Oxford English Dictionary, which is the largest dictionary we have of the English language, and you look at a word, what you will find is the earliest usage of the word in the past. So language is, we understand the definitions of words by looking how in the past they were used, which is why Jahili poetry is so important to the study of Islam, because the study of Islam can't take place except in the Arabic language. So you have to know Arabic at some point, and to understand the words of the Quran and the Sunnah, which are in Arabic, you need to know how those words were used in the past, with the exception of Imam al-Shafi'i. So Imam al-Shafi'i was considered a proof. So if Imam al-Shafi'i used the word in a certain way, or spoke in a certain way, or wrote in a certain way, that is proof that that's how those words are used. That's a tremendous, tremendous thing to say. And one of Imam al-Shafi'i's students, I believe, or contemporaries, this quote will come later, but I just remembered it now. said, had Imam Shafi'i chosen to write in the Arabic language, to write about the Arabic language, like he wrote about Usul al-Fiqh, whatever he would have written would have been the authoritative book of language. So that's how well versed and well steeped he was in the Arabic language. Imam Shafi'i also studied the asanid of al-Arab, the chains of transmission, I mean the lineage of the Arab tribes. I don't mean chains of transmission, the lineage of the Arab tribes, which is another way of saying he studied history. So he knew how the tribes were related, connected, he himself being of a noble descent. And he said about that later in life, I only studied Arabic, and I only by memorizing the poetry of Hudayl, and I only studied history so that I can better understand fiqh. So when we talk about fiqh, usul al-fiqh, sharia, etc., we are talking about something that is very, very deep. It's not enough just to know the rules and memorize the rules or memorize a few set of verses or a few set of hadith, but it's much deeper. You need to understand the context in which this law will be practiced. So let us look very briefly at some of his main teachers in Mecca in the early years, in which he studied. So of course we talked about his Quran teacher, that's very important. But after that, one of the great teachers of Imam Shafi'i was Sufyan ibn Uyayna radiyallahu anhu, who died in the year 198. A great hadith transmitter in most of our chains of transmission, like the hadith al-musalsal bil-awwaliyya, the hadith al-rahma, you'll find Sufyan ibn Uyayna, it goes back to, etc. Then we have also Muslim ibn Khalid az-Zanji, and he died in the year 179, and he was not just a teacher, but he was a murshid, he was a spiritual guide to Imam Shafi'i. And that's also very important, because when you study Islam, study the sacred sciences, you are not just studying books and memorizing texts. There is this personal transmission that comes from the teacher to the student. There is something unwritten that is transferred. So the teacher, in any subject, by the way, not only are they meant to convey to you the outward knowledge that we're studying, but they have to convey to you an inward disposition towards this knowledge. Adab, taqwa, al-wara', al-ikhlas, at-tadayyun, all of these type of things. You have to transmit to the student these type of things and advise and guide the student so that the student, goes on and does great things. So Imam Shafi'i referred to Muslim ibn Khalid az-Zanji as his murabbi and murshid. And the push for Imam Shafi'i to study Arabic and history actually came from him. And he gave him he gave Imam Shafi'i ijazah when he was 15 years old to give fatwa. So imagine Imam is 15-year-old sitting in the shade of the Kaaba, master of the Arabic language, memorized the Quran, passing out fatwas at the age of 15. In America, the age of driving is 16. So before you could even drive, most of the rest of the world it's 18. Before you could even drive, obviously there was no driving back then, but you know what I'm saying, he's a mufti. MashaAllah. So that was another major teacher that he had. Okay. Now, the next sort of main thing for us to discuss to round out the first part is his interaction with Imam Malik radiallahu anhu. Imam Malik was born in the year 93, died in the year 179, rahimahullah. And in the early years, Imam Shafi'i spent the most time, out of the teachers that we've mentioned, he spent the most time with Imam Malik. Imam Shafi'i had an insatiable desire to learn, so he asked the governor of Mecca, wrote like a letter of introduction for Imam Shafi'i as he was traveling to Medina to meet Imam Malik. So he goes to the governor of Medina and he shows him this letter, and the governor looks at the letter. He's like, if you asked me to walk barefoot from Mecca to Medina, it would be easier for me than to go to the door of Imam Malik. This is the type of aura, haiba, that Imam Malik had. Even the governor was scared to go to Imam Malik. So he goes to Imam Malik, and there's this interaction, and he sees the letter, and he says, okay, come back tomorrow and bring with you the Muwatta. And Imam Shafi'i says, well, I've memorized it. He said, you memorized it? Well, read, recite to me. So Imam Shafi'i starts reciting the Muwatta. And then Imam Malik, he sits down and he's overwhelmed. He's like, zid, keep going. And Imam Shafi'i said, in a few days I had finished reciting from memory the entire Muwatta. Muwatta of Imam Malik, being one of the great books of hadith, the great books of the Maliki madhab, has many, many asanid, many chains of transmission. The highest chain of transmission of the Muwatta is the recitation of Imam Shafi'i to Imam Malik, rahimahumullah, except that that recension or that riwayah of the Muwatta has been lost throughout time. Now, Imam Malik is known as the Imam of Medina, and there were the people of Medina at that time had taken from the fiqh of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. And there were the 7 great fuqaha of Medina: Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, who died in the year 94; Urwa ibn al-Zubayr, who died in the year 94 as well; Abu Bakr ibn Abdul Rahman ibn al-Harith, who died in the year 94 as well; Ubaidullah ibn Abdullah ibn Utbah ibn Mas'ud, who died in the year 98; Kharija ibn Zayd ibn Thabit, who died in the year 100; Qasim ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, who died in the year 107; and Sulaiman ibn Yassar, who died in the year 107. These are known as the 7 fuqaha, or the 7 jurists of Medina. And as I said in the other previous lecture, we want to trace these areas where Imam al-Shafi'i is going to study back to the Sahaba. So this is, a lot of it is the fiqh of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. Now Malik himself, rahimahullah, he learned from the Tabi'een. Imam Malik learned from the Tabi'een. And there was something that I wanted to get in a little bit more detail of those teachers. Like Rabi'a ibn Abi Abdul Rahman, who was known as Rabi'a al-Ra'i. He was the Sheikh of Imam Malik, rahimahullah. And Medina at this time was known as the people of Hadith, and Kufa, and then by extension Baghdad, was known as the people of Ra'i, the Hanafis and the Malikis. Those are some of the early terms for them. And this will become an important thing because Imam Shafi'i will basically try to reconcile the two, but that will come much later. But Imam Shafi'i spends a lot of time with Imam Malik, and it is at this time that Imam Shafi'i could be, or would have been considered, a Maliki. He had studied the fiqh of Malik directly with Malik. He had taken the positions of Malik. He was giving fatwas based on the positions of Malik, and this is an important part of his early journey with Imam Malik, and this will last up until the time when Imam Malik dies, rahimahullah. And we will stop here and pick up the rest of the journey of Imam Shafi'i in the next clip, inshaAllah. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So, in today's class, alhamdulillah, we began our journey into the great biography of this great mind, Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah. We began by talking about some of the political, socioeconomic history and background, which is important because it's the society that Imam Shafi'i was born into. Then we learned about some of the importance of the patronage of state patronage of scholarly efforts, libraries, introduction of a paper factory in Baghdad, all of these type of things that give rise to the tremendous intellectual movement that happens in the formative period of Islam, and the great internal political stability of this part of the early part of the Abbasid Caliphate, which allowed for free movement of people like Imam Shafi'i, and by extension there's an influx of religions, culture, language, translations. Imam Shafi'i, like all of the other people at his time, inherit all of these things, so there's a great intellectual movement. Then we looked at Imam Shafi'i's lineage, and we learned that four of his direct ancestors were from the companions of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. We learned that he is Qurashi and Matlabi by lineage, and that's one of the great honors that Allah Ta'ala bestowed upon him. But also in his life, as we will come to see in the next lecture or two, it got him in trouble because he's actually arrested in Yemen and taken to Baghdad under suspicion of being a subversive. So you need to know, like, why would that even happen with somebody like Imam Shafi'i? We talked about how his mother was an early part of his learning, and the person that took him to the Kutab to learn to read and write and to memorize the Quran. And by the age of 7, he memorized the Muwatta by the age of 10. He did not grow up in a house of knowledge, but he grew up in a house that respected knowledge, and he also grew up poor. That's something that's also part of his story. In his early years, we talked about some of his teachers in Mecca. Then we also learned that he had a strong affinity towards the Arabic language specifically and history, and how those two were important tools for him to further his knowledge of fiqh, as we will come to see later. And then we ended by talking about his interaction with Imam Malik. I mean, there's a little bit more that I want to say about that. We'll save that for the next clip. And how he had recited the Muwatta by memory to Imam Malik, and how he stayed with Imam Malik essentially until Imam Malik died, rahimahullah, in the year 179, and how at this time he would have been considered a Maliki and part of that madhab and that approach. And that's where we ended. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.